That's the cell body. And like this, and this would be the nuclear membrane. I'm not adding anything, I'm just pointing out. This is the cell body. This would be the nucleus. That's the nuclear membrane. And inside would be the nucleolus. And you have the chromatin material like any typical cell body. And this, of course, on the outside represents the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, these round balls, those are modified rough endoplasmic reticulum called the Nissl bodies, and you had it on your test today. So these round balls, modified rough endoplasmic reticulum, and it's called the Nissl bodies. I'm not adding it on your checklist. I'm just going with the items on here. So the cell body. The next item is the dendrites. These are the dendrites. And this gray rod represents the axon. Got it? Cell body. I did not add anything else in the side of the cell body. The dendrites and the gray rod is the axon.
Green or gray?
Gray. The gray rod inside is the axon. Now we're adding on those things now. The yellow that covers the axon would be what?
The myelin?
The myelin sheath. The closest thing to the axon would be the myelin sheath. So this yellow represents the covering of the axon, which is the myelin sheath. And outside of the yellow would be what? This green.
Neurolemma.
And this green represents what?
Neurolemma.
The neurolemma. So axon, myelin sheath, neurolemma. And the next item now is the Schwann cell. So here's a little waistband called the node of Ranvier. And here's another one, the node of Ranvier. So from one node to the next node, that would be the Schwann cell. From this node of Ranvier to the next node of Ranvier is called the Schwann cell. From this node of Ranvier to this node of Ranvier, again, would be the Schwann cell. Why do we call it a cell? Yes, it is a cell because it has its own nucleus. Here's the nucleus with the endoplasmic reticulum extending from that. And of course you have the terminal ends, which is not on your checklist. And here would be your synapse. This is the synapse between. Remember, you can have a synapse between one neuron and the next neuron, or you can have a synapse between a neuron and a muscle. In this case, synapse is between the neuron and the muscle. So that would be the neuromuscular junction or the myoneural junction. Let's go over the items that you're responsible for. Cell body, what are these?
Dendrites.
The gray rod,
Axon.
the yellow,
Myelin sheath.
the green,
Neurolemma.
what is this? Node of Ranvier, named after Dr. Ranvier. From one node to the next node is the Schwann cell. That's the neuron. We're done with that. You will also get 2 questions from here. So this is one of your bone in the backbone. And here is the spinal cord that goes through that cavity. So this is a cross section of the spinal cord, and here's the bone around it. So now, usually for the brain, the gray matter is on the outside and the white matter is interior. It's opposite in the spinal cord. The butterfly wings represents the gray matter. So gray matter, gray matter. And now the gray matter has some horns. I'm pointing out to you, but I'm not going to hold you responsible for. These are just directional terms. So now, these horns would be the posterior or the dorsal horns. Over here would be the ventral or the anterior horns. And at the side would be the lateral horns. So posterior or dorsal, ventral or anterior, and lateral horns. But any place that I touch on here, I'm expecting what? Gray matter. I'm not going to hold you responsible for the horn. That's just directional terms. Gray matter, gray matter, gray matter, gray matter, any place, gray matter. And around it would be the white matter. Inside is the gray butterfly wings, and around it is the white matter. Okay, so now We're done with that, and let's now talk about the nerves. Oh, there's something else that is supposed to be on here that I have to add on. So the nerves that leave in the spinal cord. So in the lecture you heard about the word ganglion, which is a collection of nerve cell bodies outside of the CNS. That means that they would lie outside of the brain and the spinal cord. Collection means they're going to be fat. So this one is not covered, coming from here, from the dorsal or the posterior side. So this is the dorsal root ganglion, very fat. Dorsal root ganglion. This one is covered, still fat, dorsal root ganglion, coming from this way. And lying next to the dorsal root ganglion is a thin one, and that's the ventral nerve root. On this side, it's uncovered, dorsal root ganglion. Next to that, a very thin ventral nerve root. So let's
represent here, the ventral?
The ventral, yes. So the fat one is the dorsal root ganglion. The thin one is the ventral nerve root. So this one is running posterior or dorsal. Root means, in this case, the pathway. So the dorsal root ganglion, the ventral nerve root. Again, this is covered, the dorsal root ganglion, the ventral nerve root.
The small one.
Yes, the thinner one. Let's say the thinner one. Now, there are three, the meninges going around, the meninges. So let's put it on the board. Those that got it today do not have it, so you need to add them on. So let's point them out now. Hello, mister. So these are the protective coverings of the spinal cord. And out here, this one on the outside, very thick, that is the dura mater. And now this one is inside, so this one is on the outside. There's a little partition between. So this is the inner one, and that is the arachnoid mater. Pia mater, arachnoid mater. And see now there should be some little threads, look like a spider web. It's not shown here, but in your book it shows. So that's where they get the term arachnoid from, looks like a spider web. So again, to repeat, dura mater, arachnoid mater, and then you have a space called the subarachnoid space. You had it on the lecture exam today. That's where the cerebral spinal fluid circulates, in this space called the subarachnoid space. And this is now right on top of the spinal cord. And what is this one now? Pia mater. So to repeat, the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, space, and then comes the pia mater, the most delicate. So now, someone might ask, what is this out here? So over here, remember this is a dura mater. So this space is called the epidural space. That's the epidural space, and this would be the epidural membrane. Epi means outside, on top. So it's outside of the dura mater, epidural. And lots of fat is collected there. So when the woman is in labor and delivery and is getting the epidural, you have heard about that? She's getting the epidural. This is where they go. The needle goes in this space to actually the anesthesia to numb here, so that now she doesn't feel the pain for labor and delivery. So right here is called the epidural space, filled with a lot of connective tissue and fat. This would be the epidural membrane, the epidural space. And now you have the dura mater, arachnoid mater, space, and then comes the pia mater. You're not responsible for the epidural space. You're responsible for what? The dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. So let's repeat the spinal cord. Remember, we're adding those three things for the handout that I gave. It's missing. So now, let's start off. Name the structure. Name the structure. Okay, name the structure. Dorsal root ganglion. It's fat. And this is also the dorsal root ganglion, the fat one. And the thin one that runs alongside it, ventral nerve root. The thin one, ventral nerve root. Now name this.
Pia mater, arachnoid mater,
And the deer mater. We're done with the spinal cord. Let's move on to the brain. Comes the deer mater on the outside. Now we're going to go, we're moving up. First comes first serve. Put your name on the door outside. Whoever comes first, do the test and leave, and the second people come in. It's on one day and you have it on your schedule already. That one we're not changing. These things in the lecture, so it makes life a little bit easier here. So all of this in pink is the cerebrum. All of that is the cerebrum. All of that is the cerebrum, which accounts for 80% of the brain mass. And remember, out here would be the cortex. And as you move inwards, you're actually moving into the medulla, which is usually white matter. So some things I can't test you on, so listen very carefully. This is the cerebrum. Behind it would be what? In brown is the cerebellum. Now the brain has two hemispheres, right and left. So now I am separating the brain into two halves. This would be the, oops. This would be the right cerebral hemisphere, and this would be the left cerebral hemisphere. So now, certain things that are testable, if I put this, and I'd say now, line up a piece of paper, and I said, name the structure, it would be the cerebral hemisphere. This is the left cerebral hemisphere. This is the right. I'm not going to hold you responsible for right or left, provided you say what? Cerebral hemisphere. Now, we're separating the cerebral hemisphere by what is known as a longitudinal fissure. See the term here? Longitudinal fissure. So, right here, if I stick a piece of paper between the two halves of the cerebral hemisphere, the answer would be the longitudinal fissure. So when the neurosurgeon is doing surgery, takes off the skull of the patient, and now he's opening up the two halves to get inside of the brain. So he doesn't have to do any cut. He just probe along here, and the two halves open up. So now he has the right cerebral hemisphere and he has the left cerebral hemisphere. What is on this side is the same thing on the other side. I can't test you on gray matter or white matter because out here should be the gray matter opposite to the spinal cord, and as you come inside it should be what? White matter. But you don't see any differentiation. So how the model is made, you can't differentiate gray matter out here. So I can't test you on gray or white matter.
Crossed it out.
Got it? So you can cross off gray matter and white matter. But you're going to keep the longitudinal fissure because I showed you the longitudinal fissure. And if I have the entire brain and stick a piece of paper there, it would be the longitudinal fissure. Now, let's do the major parts of the brain. We said this is the cerebrum. Down here, the brown would be the cerebellum. So now let's put it together. This part of the brain, that the mound, that would be the pons. And the extension or continuation of the pons becomes the medulla oblongata. So again, here's the pons, followed by the medulla oblongata, and of course the continuation of that would be the spinal cord. Even when you take one half of the cerebral hemisphere, you can still see that this is elevated, so this would be the pons, and this is the medulla oblongata, followed pons and the medulla oblongata. So now we're going to go inside of the cerebral hemisphere. Let's take this half and look at the items inside of the cerebral hemisphere. So the first thing, I have already pointed out the cerebral hemisphere, the longitudinal fissure. You can take out gray matter and white matter. And now we're talking about the ventricles. Today you were tested as where the lateral ventricles are found, and the lateral ventricles are found in the cerebrum. So right around here, you have the third ventricle, and then you have the lateral ventricles. There are two, look like butterfly wings. This is 1.
That's the gray, right? Right here?
All of this is gray matter.
No,
So
I mean-
all of that is gray too, but we are not going to test you on gray or white matter. So the lateral ventricle is here. There are 2 that look like butterfly wings, and around this, which is this mound in yellow, is the thalamus, and around the thalamus would be the 3rd ventricle. And then you have a 4th ventricle down there. But that's a difficult way to test because you're not so sure about certain things. You can say, yes, around here is the 3rd ventricle, lateral ventricle is up here, and the 4th. So this is the best way. I asked them to purchase the ventricles by themselves. So those are the ventricles. That's what I'll use for the ventricles. These 2 are the lateral ventricles. Not 1st and 2nd. Lateral ventricles. There are 2. So they're actually closed, but they can open up like butterfly wings. And the hole represents the thalamus, and going around the thalamus would be the 3rd ventricle. And then you have an aqueduct. This is the cerebral aqueduct that ends into the 4th ventricle. So let's point out the ventricles now. Lateral ventricles. Then you have a hole represents this look like a bird head. The hole represents the thalamus. Going around the thalamus is the 3rd ventricle. So here's the hole. I was pointing to the wrong place. So here is the hole. Looks like a bird eye. And around it would be the 3rd ventricle. Then you have a cerebral aqueduct that ends in a foot. The foot is the 4th ventricle. So I'm not going to ask about ventricles here. This is what I will use for the test for the ventricles. So again, if I point this out, what is this one? If I go around that eye, what is it? 3rd. And these are the lateral ventricles. Okay, so we're done with the ventricles. Now let's point out one of the corpus callosum. It's an example of white matter. Corpus callosum. So it's here, and it's also going to be on the other side. Corpus callosum that goes around. That's example of your white matter. So now, when the surgeon is finished with surgery, he doesn't have to suture the brain, so he just put it together. Make sure that the corpus callosum is aligned. It's very sticky and will hold the 2 halves of the brain again. Got it? So we should know where the corpus callosum is. It's an example of white matter. And now I showed you the mound represents the thalamus. So position is important. The mound is the thalamus, and if we go below the mound, what it would be? Hypothalamus. Thalamus, hypothalamus.
So the thalamus is pink there?
No, not pink. This yellow mound, that's a thalamus.
Oh, okay.
This is something different. This is a choroid plexus, not on your list. But here is the thalamus. Down below is the hypothalamus. And going, if we take this one, location is important.
What number is the thalamus on that model?
We're not going to go by numbers. We're going to go by location. It's a yellow mound. It's a yellow mound. You can see it's yellow. That's the thalamus. I don't even see the numbers. This is the yellow mound, which is the thalamus. Below the thalamus would be what?
The hypothalamus.
And this represents what? The pituitary gland. So look at the location. Thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland. Pituitary gland that you studied in the lecture, where you have the anterior and posterior pituitary gland. Okay, so now some other things. Let's put the entire halves of the cerebral hemisphere again together. And let's put the cerebellum. And now you're seeing here, this is a nerve. That's the olfactory nerve, and it ends in a bulb, and that's the bulb is the olfactory bulb. That's the nerve for smelling. So the olfactory nerve, but you have on your list the bulb. The olfactory bulb is at the very tip. And so this is where what it looks like on the brain itself. The olfactory nerve, it ends in a bulb, olfactory bulb. Now, down below, There are two. These two are the optic nerves. These are the optic nerves. Here's one and here's the other. The two optic nerves. So we have the entire brain together. You're seeing two olfactory nerves with olfactory bulb at the end. And right below it, you're seeing the optic nerves. Where are the optic nerves going? To the eyes. And so now the optic nerves, they meet right there. But when they meet, they actually cross over. And in genetics, the word chiasma means crossing over. You're not seeing too much of the crossing over. You're just seeing that they meet together. On the brain itself, the sheep brain, which we're going to dissect in a little while, you'll actually see the crossing over. And that's one of my favorite tests. It's the optic chiasma, where it crosses over. So keep in mind, this is my right eye, this is my left one, and the right eye is seen over there looking at the face of the clock. It's going to be interpreted on the left side of the, what part of the brain? The occipital lobe.
Yes.
And what the left eye is seeing is going to be interpreted on the right side of the occipital lobe because the nerves crosses over, right? Crosses over at the optic chiasma. Got it? So now, this that makes up 80% of the brain mass? And what is this down here?
Cerebellum.
And what is this?
Pons.
And? Right, the extension of that would be the spinal cord. I'm not test, and if I put a paper here, what is it? Longitudinal fissure. I am not testing you on gray or white matter, it's not very distinct. I'll use this for the ventricles. What are these?
Lateral ventricles.
And going around that little eye, what is it?
Third ventricle.
And down here is the fourth ventricle. And now we go to the, so now we open this, and we're looking at one half of the cerebral hemisphere, and name the structure. Corpus callosum. That's the corpus callosum. And now we put it back together. And name this.
Olfactory nerve. Olfactory bulb.
And these two are the optic nerves. And now let's open again. The yellow mound represents the
Thalamus.
and below it is the,
Hypothalamus.
and you're only going to see the pituitary gland on one side. That's the pituitary gland, looks like a P in pink. So again, the yellow mound is the thalamus, below it is the hypothalamus, then the pituitary gland. You're seeing one half of what? Of the optic nerve. One half of the optic nerve, one, and the other optic nerve is right there. So on the whole brain, you should see the crossing over, which is the optic chiasma. So now, let's point out some other items. So here, watch carefully now. When I have this like that, and I'm out here, it is the cerebellum. But if I look inside, the cerebellum is cut. You're seeing this now white matter that looks like the veins of the leaf, and it's called the arbor vitae. See, the word arbor vitae is down there. It's the white veins in the cerebellum. So now you have to be careful. If I tag this, I'm looking for the word what?
Cerebellum.
Cerebellum. If I go here, I'm looking for what?
Arbor vitae.
Arbor vitae. That's a street in Inglewood, I understand.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm looking for the arbor vitae. Now, what else I need to point out? So now we're in the midbrain. Very important. So this part of the brain is called, out here with the forebrain, hindbrain, and we're in the midbrain, right there. So there are four mounds. 1, 2, and the other 2 is on the other side. So that makes it 4. So that's called the corpora quadrigemina. Very important. Corpora quadrigemina. 1, 2, and 2 is on here. Corpora quadrigemina. Part of the midbrain. And right here, see, this is a choroid plexus. Location, location. Right here, close to the corpora quadrigemina, is the pineal gland. That's the pineal gland or the pineal body. So here is the choroid plexus, but right there, that's the pineal gland or the pineal body. And you have two mounds here, two on the other side. It's the corpora quadrigemina. Beautiful on the sheep brain by itself. So we have finished with all the parts. I have showed you the cerebral hemisphere, longitudinal fissure. We take off gray matter and white matter. This is the pituitary gland, and this represents what? Optic nerve. Location. The optic nerve lies close to the pituitary gland.
Okay.
So the thalamus, hypothalamus, optic nerve, pituitary gland.
Can you point out the quadra, whatever?
Okay, so what? Before we go to that, what is this?
It's the pons.
Pons, and down here is the? So now we're in the midbrain, and here's 1, 2 mounds.
There we go.
And the other two would be on the other side. Make up 4. And so that would be the corpora quadrigemina. It's in the midbrain. 1, 2, 3, 4. And lying right above it is the pineal body or the pineal gland.
Which is pineal body?
Here.
The pink one?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And these are the 4 mounds, which represents the corpora quadrigemina. So what is this?
Pons.
Pons, and what is down here? All of this is the, and this would be the corpus callosum, and you're still seeing the 1/2 of the corpora quadrigemina. The yellow mound represents the,
Thalamus.
and down below,
Hypothalamus.
and this would represent what? The optic nerve. So the yellow mound is the thalamus, hypothalamus, optic nerve. The pituitary gland is not on this half.
It's on the right.
Okay, so another one that we can use. Location is important. What is it? Corpus callosum. And inside here, this is the cerebellum. So this is inside, same. Arbor vitae. And out here would be the pons, medulla oblongata. And this represents what? Pituitary gland. And down here would be the hypothalamus. Okay, one more model. Presents what? Corpus callosum. You have your lateral ventricles in here, but I'm using that one over there. And this represents the, but I'm inside, so it would be what? Arbor vitae. And now this mound represents the thalamus, and down below would be the hypothalamus. And down, this represents the pituitary gland, and this that sticks out here would be the optic nerve. So again, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland. This represents the optic nerve. This is the, very good. So wherever you take it, you're supposed to know the things. Location. Thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, optic nerve. So 2 on this side, 1, 2, so it's the corpora quadrigemina. It's supposed to be a total of 4. The pineal gland would be right here. That very close to the corpora quadrigemina. This one. This represents the choroid plexus that is not on your list.
Okay.
What is this?
Cerebrum.
And what is this behind?
Cerebellum.
Cerebellum.
Mm-hmm.
See, it looks different. This is the cerebrum of the folds. The folds or convolutions. You have the gyrus and you have the sulci. All of this is the cerebrum. Behind it is the cerebellum. This was dissected. So now let's open it up. So you're seeing both parts of the cerebral hemisphere. And you can see for yourself that this is white matter. So what is the white matter called?
Arbor vitae.
And this would be what?
The corpus callosum.
Corpus callosum. It has everything that we studied there. Let's put it back together. And we can actually pull this off. Would be very gentle. That is part of what? What is it?
Looks like tofu.
The innermost covering.
Duramater?
The piamator.
No, piamator.
Piamator.
Yeah.
Okay, so this mound represents what?
The
Pons. And this is
medulla
the
oblongata.
medulla oblongata. Okay, so now you can see these. What are these?
olfactory nerves.
Optic nerves.
Oh wait, optic nerves.
And if I go
Optic
right
nerves.
in the center,
The longitudinal
Optic
vis.
chiasma.
Oh wait, that's the line that
optic
separates.
chiasma. One optic nerve, the second optic nerve, they meet right there. They're supposed to cross over. That would be
That's
the
the crossover
optic
point.
chiasma.
Okay.
Now, Miss Peels, what is this?
Those are
Same location. What is it?
the olfactory
The
bulbs.
olfactory bulb.
Bulbs, yeah.
See, it's nice and big. The
Okay.
olfactory bulb.
Olfactory
There it is also, the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb.
Okay.
Olfactory bulb. Again, this is the optic nerve. Here's the optic nerve. In the middle is the optic chiasma. Okay.
Got it now.
And so now we're looking inside. And this is beautiful. Let's see where if you can point it out. What is this?
Quadra.
Two mounds, a large
two
one and a
mounds.
small one. Large and small, what are they?
Those are the
Corpus
corpora
quadrigemina.
quadripora
Quadrigemina.
quadrigemina. There you go.
And
Corpora
very close to
quadrigemina.
that, beautiful, what is this?
That looks like a pituitary
It's
gland.
actually falling off. I just, what is that?
Penal.
That's the penal body.
Gland. That's the
Okay.
penal gland.
That's the
So
penal body.
it must be on the test. We'll make sure to find on this one. Somehow it broke, but that's the penal body right there.
Okay.
Gland close there.
Penile body break.
Corpora quadrigemina, right there. You have the corpus callosum. You have the arbor vitae. Here's the penal gland. It must be on the test. And the other thing that I usually put on the real brain is the optic chiasma. Okay, so now
chiasma.
this is not, by the way, the pituitary gland. That's called the mammary body. You don't have it on your test. In all of them, the pituitary gland was removed, so you're not going to see the pituitary. But that's called the
better.
mammary
Can you
body.
show the penile body on that one?
Let's see if it's some are broken and fall off. Remember, these are dissected previously by other students. So in this one, the penile body broke off, but you can see the corpora quadrigemina, two mounds on that side. Let's remember, you can put gloves on and you can go in this bucket there. Later.
Cremator, the covering of it.
The olfactory bulbs,
bulb,
yeah.
and what are these?
The optic nerves.
Nerves, and right in the middle would be the
Optic chiasma.
chiasma. So this is a nice one to dissect, to find the take this off, and then you'll find the penile body. Anyone who is willing to dissect those too. So the penile body is much nicer than on the model.
Straight.
Corpora quadrigemina is another, and also the optic chiasma. Here is another that has not been dissected yet. Again, what are these?
Olfactory bulbs.
And here is the optic
Optic
nerve
nerve.
in the middle.
Optic
Optic
chiasma.
chiasma. This is the pons,
Pons.
followed by the medulla oblongata. So, no takers.
We'll pass, thank you.
Cat with a knife.
Penal.
Penal body.
That's
Yeah,
the
penal body. There we go. So that's
Pardon
the
me?
penal body.
I was gonna say to point it on the other side because I couldn't see, but I can see now.
Can you actually see
Penile body.
the transverse ventricles there?
No, very difficult.
What's inside?
Should be inside here. The lateral ventricles
that's what
would be in
I
here.
meant, lateral.
The lateral would be in here. So what are these two? Right below the penile body. Penile body, and these are the corpora quadrigemina. Corpora
So
quadrigemina.
the penile body sits right on top of it.
Right, very close to that. So we're going to move on to
The aqueous humor is in front.
the aqueous humor is in front. It's not seen here. It's watery. These are the extrinsic eye muscle. They have names, but we're not going to go into individual names. Just if I tag them, extrinsic eye muscle.
clear one
This
called again?
moves the eyeball. Extrinsic eye muscle. 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 But this is the lacrimal gland. Now let's go back now to the macula lutea and the fovea centralis. See the optic disc here, by the way, because it's hidden. In this, I told you that the optic nerve would be there, And so right there would be the optic disc. So we can put back the lens in place and this pulled apart. This would be the iris and the cornea. So to repeat, the aqueous humor lies in front of the lens, and when there's lots of fluid there and it's not drained by the ophthalmologist, then the patient ends up, the lens, the cornea becomes cloudy and they're suffering from glaucoma. Now, let's point out some other items that is going to be seen. Eye muscle. And what is this over here?
Cornea.
That's the cornea. And this in blue is the iris. And we can open up this. And this, again, ball represents the
Vitreous humor.
vitreous humor, the jelly-like one. And now you're seeing the optic nerve, and this white in front of the optic nerve represents what? The optic disc or the blind spot, and inside here represents the retina. So the sclera, the red represents the choroid, and inside would be the retina. Now, you have the muscles out here, and this represents the ciliary body, and you see now the white thread-like represents the suspensory ligament that suspend what? What is it attached to?
The lens.
So for those people on this side, sclera, the red behind it represents the choroid, inside is the retina, and here's the lens. This with the ciliary body, with the ciliary muscle out there, and the white threads suspending the lens. It's called the suspensory ligament.
The ciliary body is behind the ligaments, or it's part of it?
It's the ligaments are attached to the ciliary body.
Okay, so the dark.
This is the ciliary body. That's
brown?
a suspensory. Yes.
Okay.
That's a suspensory ligament. So now, and you have the iris in front, and then the cornea. So now, not shown on this one. Let's see those two over here. So some models shows it very nicely, some don't, but they're testable. So this is the optic nerve, and lying in front of the optic nerve would be what? Optic disc. And now on the side here, around it, that's the macula lutea. The macula lutea is on the side, not in front, not in front, the macula lutea. And in the dead center of the macula lutea, see there's a spot there. What is that? The fovea centralis, where all the light gathers for the images. So again, to repeat, here is the optic disc that lies in front of the optic nerve. On the side, that area is the macula lutea. And in the dead center of the macula lutea is the fovea centralis. So when you're seeing an image, everything gathers in the fovea centralis. So that shows it. Here's another one. So I have to use the most distinct. So again, we'll break the eye in parts so you can see that. So again, here, you're not seeing the optic disc in this one, but you're seeing the macula lutea. And in the dead center of the macula lutea would be the fovea centralis. So make sure you get it right. Again, this would be the sclera. This is the choroid. Ready. So, for example, external part of the external ear, also called the auricle. The word auricle means something that's going to cover something. So this is called the pinna, or the auricle. And then you have now the external auditory meatus, or we can say external auditory canal. So all along here, that's the external auditory meatus or the canal. Meatus is an opening. External auditory meatus or the canal. The next is the tympanic membrane. So we can take this by itself. This is the tympanic membrane. otherwise known as the eardrum. So if you put the eardrum, you're absolutely correct. And so now that leads you from the tympanic membrane out, that would be the outer ear. This is leading you now to the middle ear. And you have 3 bones in the middle ear. So this one looks like a hammer. So this is the hammer or the malleus. You were tested on that before. The second one is the anvil or the incus. And the third one, see, this is the third one, and that is the stirrup or the stapes. You're tested on that when you're looking at the bones, that the stirrup or the stapes. And so that sits in the oval window. So we can't separate it because we want to break things. So this, if I tag that, I'm looking for the stirrup or the stapes. If I go here, I'm looking for the oval window. This sits in the oval window. This sits in the oval window. But there's also a round window. And here's the round window now. The round window, see if it shows very nicely. So here is the round window. It sits here. This is all of this is the cochlea, and there's the round window. But I even have a much better round. And here's the external auditory meatus or canal. And we get to the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. Looks like a hammer. It's the hammer or the malleus. This is the incus or the anvil. And here is the stirrup or the stapes that sits in the oval window. And very nice, this is the round window. That's the round window right there. Shows up nicely, even much nicer than how this one is shown. This is also the round window. Round window. Okay, so moving along. The inner ear. So we're bypassing, we're in the middle ear, now we're into the inner ear. And the inner ear now consists of all of this is the bony labyrinth. That's the bony labyrinth. That's the bony labyrinth. And so now this represents the semicircular canal for balance and equilibrium. Semicircular canal. And at the base of the semicircular canal, so it's a little bit fat, that would be the ampulla. The ampulla lies at the base of the semicircular canal. See, they're a little bit fat there. That's the ampulla. That's the ampulla. And now you have the cochlea. So it looks like a snail. All of this is the cochlea. That's the cochlea. And we're not going to go inside of the cochlea. See, this can open up. And we can see that inside here, which we are tested today, the organ of Corte is found inside of the cochlea. You don't have the Corte on your list, so we're not going to go that far. And now we're looking for the vestibular nerve and the vestibular cochlear nerve. So when a nerve, both of these don't show that, but here, this part of the inner ear is the vestibule. Here is the semicircular canal, that's the cochlea. When the nerve is attached to the vestibule, it's called the vestibular nerve. When it's attached to the cochlea, it's called the cochlear nerve. When they both go together, it becomes a fatter nerve, it's called the vestibular cochlear nerve. This one is supposed to go to the vestibule, but it's not attached. So I'm not going to test you on that. When it goes directly, it is the vestibular nerve. This one is the cochlear nerve. It touches the cochlea. Now the vestibular and the cochlear nerve makes this larger nerve called the Roman numeral number 8, which is what? The vestibular cochlear nerve. Got it? So again, on this one, this doesn't even show the vestibular nerve. It just shows the cochlear nerve. It doesn't show the vestibular cochlea. It's a larger nerve. But this shows the vestibular cochlea. Roman numeral number 8, these two nerves together. And the last is the eustachian tube. So this tube here, called the pharyngeal tube or the eustachian. So we'll go with this simple term, the eustachian tube. So when the patient has an ear infection, then all of the fluid goes from here and goes into the throat. And you end up having an ear infection and a sore throat at the same time. So any questions about the ear?
On the printout you gave us, number 11 is the vestibular nerve.
So you, on this handout here,
And 13 is the cochlear.
where is number 11? Okay, so yes, number 11 is going to the vestibule, so that will be the vestibular nerve. Here is your external auditory meatus or canal. So now you're entering in the middle. So here's your eardrum or tympanic membrane. This is your hammer or your malleus, your incus or your anvil, and here is your stirrup or your stapes that sits into the oval window. And now here's your semicircular canal. The ampulla is at the base. This is the cochlea. So now when the nerves come to the vestibule, that's due to the vestibular nerve. When it comes to the cochlea, due to the cochlear nerve, when they're together, it's the vestibular cochlear nerve. And here's your eustachian tube. Now, showing you again. Here's your semicircular canals. The base of it is the ampulla. When the nerves come to the vestibule, this part of the tube is the vestibule. The vestibule is between the semicircular canal and the cochlea. When it hits the cochlea, it's the cochlear nerve. Combining, it's called the vestibular cochlear or cranial nerve number 8. And this is your tympanic membrane. There's the hammer or the malleus, the incus or the anvil, the stirrup or the stapes that sits into the round window.
Oval window.
Into the oval window, yes, oval window, correct. And this is the round window. So you need to practice, practice, practice. It's all there for you. Now, this should be easy.
Cornea.
Cornea, and what is this?
The sclera.
The sclera. And so now we do some dissection. So I'm going to ask in front of the lens. So expect to get some fluid.
Oh.
So you see all that fluid that's coming out?
What is it called?
Aqueous humor.
So you should be telling me now.
The aqueous, yeah.
That's the aqueous humor.
Sorry.
So I can't test you on the aqueous humor because it's actually watery fluid. So that's the aqueous humor that is popping out.
It's pretty tough.
This is why I'm going into
The
occupational.
cornea is a little bit tough. Remember, this is a sclera on the outside. That's the cornea in front.
It's like if I dropped my phone in there.
And what is this now?
Vitreous humor.
Oh, this.
That's
Is that the lens?
This is the lens.
Yeah.
That's the lens. That's the lens.
I think he had
like it just didn't
a little
belong.
bit of cataract there.
And now you tell me now, what is this now?
That's
The gooey
That's still
stuff.
aqueous humor. What is this now?
Vitreous.
The jelly-like substance is the vitreous humor that is represented by that plastic ball, right? So the jelly-like substance that I'm popping out now, that's the vitreous humor. And by the way, what is this?
Optic nerve.
Yeah, that's optic.
That's the optic nerve.
Oh, Jesus.
My daughter would love this stuff.
Why?
She just likes.
Have you never gotten school?
She always studies with me
Aww.
with books.
So all of this is the jelly-like, which is the vitreous humor.
Wow.
And what is this beautiful thing that I'm looking at?
Or cord.
What is it?
The retina.
That's the retina. That's the retina. That's the retina.
Oh boy. It's blue.
Is that dyed or is that how it normally is?
Yeah.
That's how it is normally. Nothing is dyed here. It's the real cow's eye. And now, remember, this is the optic nerve.
So that must be the optic disc somewhere.
Yeah, I'm a watcher. I can watch you do this. I can't physically do that myself. I'm just
Oops, 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 oops.
You'll be okay. It was not you. That did not happen to you.
felt like it was coming this way. It bounced off her.
So in front of the optic nerve, this doesn't show it well, but you should have a little bit of gathering there that would make the optic disc. So we'll find one that is nice and testable. And now, what is this that goes around? What is
It
it?
goes around.
The feathery structure. What is it?
Oh, that's the
The ciliary body.
yeah.
That is testable. The ciliary body, that's testable. The lens is testable. The optic nerve is testable, and that's the ciliary body. And I'm going to find one that shows now the optic disc. Looks very nice. So let's do another dissection.
That was pretty
Careful,
close.
Careful.
Pretty close.
Don't want to hit you.
I'll close my eyes.
That's what the cow's saying.
Don't tell me
So all
that.
that water is the aqueous humor.
That's tough.
Mhm.
Followed by the jelly-like, which is the vitreous humor. And that's the lens.
wow.
All of the vitreous humor, jelly-like substance. Beautiful ciliary body. You can't see the suspensor ligament because it should be white. It's all broken. The lens suspend the lens.
Did you dissect stuff when you were growing up?
Right? You must be an amazing cook.
Little pet cemetery in your backyard.
So now this shows it very nicely. Testable. What is this right there now? That's the optic disc. So expect to see one pinned. That's the optic disc right there, whitish in color. Showed very nicely. That's the optic disc. So things to expect on the cow's eye itself. The optic disc can also have for most the ciliary body.
Do the